Bias in the real world. The crazy, confusing definition of bias is, are you ready? The systematic inaccuracy in data due to the characteristics of the process employed in creation, collection, manipulation, and presentation of data, or due to the faulty sample design of the estimating technique. Since that was so confusing, here's a simpler definition. Basically, something is biased if, in the long run, it over or underestimates what it is estimating. In this video, I will discuss 5 different types of bias. They are experiment bias, selection bias, non-response bias, wording bias, and finally, voluntary response bias. The first bias is experiment bias. Experiment bias happens when something is flawed in your experiment that affects the results. Here's an example. Pretend you're a police officer. You want to find out how many cars speed on the highway. Now, when you're doing your experiment, don't drive a police car because many people will slow down if they see a police car on the highway. I know I would. Driving a police car will change the results of your experiment, creating an experiment bias. Instead, drive a common car and record speeds. The next type of bias I will discuss is selection bias. Selection bias is when you fail to represent the whole population in your experiment. Pretend you're a surveyor for a newspaper called the Literary Digest for the 1936 presidential election. Yep, that's you. As a surveyor, you want to figure out who will win the election, Roosevelt or Landon. In order to ask the people of the United States who they will vote for, you use telephone directories and car registration lists. Your poll said that Landon would win with 57% of the vote, but the poll was wrong. Why was it wrong? It was wrong because you didn't represent the whole population. Not everyone owned cars and telephones in the 1930s, only wealthy people. Your experiment had a selection bias. George Gallup, one of your rival surveyors for another newspaper, gave an accurate poll and predicted that Roosevelt would win. He selected the whole population. This leads us directly to non-response bias. Non-response bias is when people are unwilling or unable to participate in the survey. The Literary Digest survey you did before shows this bias. Roosevelt supporters tended to be low-income families who couldn't afford cars. Since Roosevelt supporters did not receive surveys, they could not respond. This is why there was a non-response bias in the poll. Next, I will discuss wording bias. Wording bias is when the way a question is worded drastically changes the outcome of a survey. In 1993, the New York Times put out a poll asking, "Does it seem possible or does it seem impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened?" Wow, that's a pretty confusing question. I don't even know what it's asking. No wonder the results showed that 22% of Americans thought it was possible that the Holocaust never took place. Because of the wording bias, they redid the poll and the new question was, "Does it seem possible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened, or do you feel certain that it happened?" Only about 1% of Americans thought it was possible the Holocaust never happened, while 8% were unsure. Without the wording bias, the poll seems more accurate. The last type of bias I'll be talking about is voluntary response bias. Voluntary response bias is when sample members are volunteers. Have you ever listened to call-in radio shows that have surveys on controversial topics? Those who are really passionate about certain topics are usually the ones who call into the radio show. Therefore, radio shows overrepresent people who have strong opinions, which is why they are subject to voluntary response bias. So we have experiment bias, where as a policeman, if you want to see how many people are speeding on the highway, you shouldn't use your police car because people slow down when they see a police car. We also have selection bias, where if you're conducting a survey, you should make sure that you select all parts of the population. Next is non-response bias, where you have to take into account people who are unwilling or unable to answer the survey. Then there's wording bias, which says that the way a question is worded can drastically change the outcome of the survey. Last but not least, we have voluntary response bias, which is when sample members are volunteers. Keep in mind that volunteers are usually only people who are super passionate about the topic. Can you find some bias in your real world?